as a naturalist, I look upon dissociation as just one of the things that happen in nature, like volcanoes erupt, stars go supernova, black holes form, lightning strikes, dissociation happens. It's one of the potentialities of nature, and given enough time and enough variability of states, it's bound to happen. So I regard it much in the same way that we tend to regard life today. It was bound to happen. The right circumstances were bound to eventually happen, and life arose. And then, of course, life that has the ability to reproduce itself is the one that would stick around. In the same way, dissociation, which is another word for life, in my view, the dissociation that was capable of sort of enduring and reproducing itself is the one we see around, because that's the one that lasted. So for me, it's a natural phenomenon, and it's only pathological when we regard it in the context of adaptability or maladaptability to a social context. Dissociation is happening non-pathological levels in all of us. Every time we dream, we dissociate. We identify with the dream avatar and not with the parts of our minds that are generating the rest of the dream. We dissociate every time we forget a memory that we can later remember again. We dissociate every time we put things in a drawer so we can go to work in the morning. That's even a deliberate form of dissociation. You know, I compartmentalize things. I find a space for this and that. This is not pathological. This is adaptive. It's not maladaptive. Extreme forms of dissociation related to trauma are maladaptive in our social context. But the appeal to dissociation is not meant to carry over that pathological sense of dissociation to the universe, because that pathological sense only has meaning within the context of our society. Beyond that, dissociation is just one of the potentials of nature, like lightning and erupting volcanoes. It once happened and it endures. That's how I regard it. Yeah, I'll leave it at this. Maybe Rupert can speak to this, taking into consideration that what we meant by dissociation here is my view of life itself, how life arose.
I would agree with you, Bernardo, when I say that dissociation doesn't really happen for a reason. It's just it's the nature of consciousness to vibrate within itself, to move within itself, and what we're referring to as dissociation is an inevitable consequence of that natural activity. But I'd like to say something about dissociation, just add something to the conversation possibly. Ultimately, dissociation doesn't really happen. It's a model. I think it's an accurate, very useful model. But the best way I can describe this is using the analogy of going to a 3D IMAX cinema. I imagine that many of you have been to a 3D cinema with your kids, if not by yourself. You go into the cinema and you're given a pair of goggles, and you look at the screen in front of you, and the screen is just a fuzzy, blurry image. You put on your goggles, and suddenly you find yourself immersed in the ocean, and there are fishes swimming around you. You take off your goggles. Not only the children, but also the adults are all reaching out their hands, trying to touch the fish in the ocean in which they feel that they are immersed. Now, what is it that makes us feel in the cinema that we are not outside the image on the screen, but that we are immersed in it? Do we ever actually become immersed as an entity in the ocean? No, it is the activity. It's when we put on the goggles that we seem to become immersed in the ocean. Now, In the analogy, the activity of consciousness is the fuzzy, incoherent pattern on the screen. That's just the raw vibration of consciousness. It is when consciousness assumes the form of perception, that's it. It puts on the activity of thinking and perceiving. That with that activity, it localizes itself within its own activity. So no real localization takes place. No real dissociation takes place. It only seems to take place when consciousness puts on the glasses of a finite mind, a human mind. It puts on the glasses that consist of thinking and perceiving. It is that activity which seems to localize consciousness within itself as a separate subject of experience, from whose perspective it views its own activity as the outside universe. But the dissociation doesn't actually happen. The word I sometimes use for Bernardo's word dissociation, I sometimes refer to a localization of consciousness within itself, or a contraction of consciousness within itself. It's just my way of saying the same thing. But in both cases, that the localization, the contraction, the dissociation, it doesn't really happen. It only seems to be happening from the perspective of the separate subject of experience that we seem to become. Why do we seem to become this? It's because consciousness has assumed the form of perception and has therefore localized or seemed to localize itself as a point of view within itself. So, although, and going back to where I started, although it doesn't happen for a reason, this localization process enables consciousness to perceive itself as the universe. Because infinite consciousness cannot perceive its own activity directly, because it would have to do so from, if infinite consciousness were to perceive the universe directly, it would have to do so from every single point of view in the universe. It would be the deepest, darkest black image you could imagine. So in order to perceive an object, consciousness must localize itself as an apparently separate subject. So this localization, or the apparent localization of ourself, or the dissociation of ourself as finite minds out of infinite consciousness, enables perception. It enables creation to take place, or perhaps not creation, but it enables reality, the activity of infinite consciousness, to appear as a universe. It is the means by which existence emerges out of being. It is the means by which reality, which has no form, appears as form without ever ceasing to be itself.
A quick linguistic point so people don't mistakenly conclude that this is a second point where we differ. We don't. I completely agree with you that there is no actual separation ever happening here.
Yes.
There is no actual even diminishing of consciousness in any way. It's an illusion. I use the word dissociation to refer to the illusion, and the word separation as what is not happening. So the illusion of separation is itself a phenomenon. It's not nothing. It could perhaps not have been there, but it happens. So we have that illusion. And I refer to that illusion as dissociation. That's actually consistent with the technical literature in psychology, because psychiatrists know that a dissociated patient does not have multiple minds. And they know that because the dissociation can come to an end. There can be reintegration. And then the patient even knows that, oh, it was always me. I was playing all the roles. I know it now. I know that I was never actually fragmented, but he or she had the illusion of fragmentation. And that's what I call the dissociation. I call the illusion dissociation.
Yes. I'm well aware, Bernardo, that you don't think that the dissociation is real. I understand. You think it's an illusion. I said that more in response to, was it Batima's question about why dissociation happens? So it was really just, I wanted to make that point, which I know we both share, that the dissociation is only in the appearance. It doesn't really happen. Yeah.